The desert heat rippled across the firing range in waves that made the distant mountains shimmer like mirages. Colonel Victoria Thorne stood at the edge of the observation platform, her Marine Corps uniform crisp despite the 100-degree morning, watching a SEAL sniper team prepare for their demonstration. The wind carried the sharp scent of gun oil and hot sand, mixing with the metallic taste that always seemed to hang in the air at these remote training facilities. She had been at Naval Special Warfare Command's Advanced Marksmanship Facility for 3 days now, sent as a liaison from Marine Corps headquarters to observe and report on the SEAL sniper program's new long-range capabilities. It was the kind of assignment that felt like a courtesy, a nod to inter-service cooperation that meant watching from the sidelines while the real operators did their work. Master Chief Garrett Voss stood near the primary firing line, his weathered face creased from decades of squinting into scopes and sun. He was briefing his team with the casual authority of a man who had forgotten more about precision shooting than most people would ever learn. Victoria recognized the type, had served alongside men like him in places neither of them could ever discuss in official reports. The SEAL candidates moved with practiced efficiency, setting up their rifles on the extended range that stretched nearly 3 miles into the empty Nevada wasteland. She noticed the way they carried themselves, the confidence that came from being part of an elite community, the certain knowledge that they represented the pinnacle of American special operations capability. Lieutenant K. Brennan was holding court near the spotting stations, his voice carrying across the platform as he explained wind calculations to a group of younger SEALs. He had the build of a recruiting poster and the swagger to match, gesturing broadly as he described his last deployment's highlight shots. Victoria had read his file, knew he had legitimate skills to back up the bravado, but there was something in the way he performed for his audience that made her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe there are military bases near you where stories like this unfold. She shifted her weight slightly, feeling the familiar presence of her notebook in her cargo pocket, the government-issue pen clipped to her sleeve. The tools of an observer, a documenter, someone whose job was to watch and report rather than participate. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, but if anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed the calluses on her trigger finger, worn smooth by thousands of hours behind a rifle. They might have seen the way her eyes tracked movement across the range with automatic precision, cataloging distances and wind indicators without conscious thought. But no one was paying attention to the Marine colonel with the administrative assignment. Their focus was on the impressive array of rifles laid out on the firing line, on the advanced optics and specialized ammunition that represented millions in research and development funding, on the demonstration that would showcase capabilities most people assumed only existed in movies. Victoria had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes the most valuable asset an operator could possess. She watched Brennan swagger toward the primary shooting position, watched Voss check his equipment with the careful attention of a professional, watched the younger SEALs jostle for position at the spotting scopes. The morning sun climbed higher, promising a scorching afternoon, and somewhere in the distance, a target waited at a range that would challenge even the most skilled marksman. She pulled out her notebook, clicked her pen, and prepared to observe. That was her job here, after all. Just observe and report. Nothing more than that. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of Brennan's confident laughter across the platform, and Victoria allowed herself the smallest of smiles that never quite reached her eyes. The afternoon sun had shifted position, casting longer shadows across the firing range as Voss gathered the SEAL team for what he called the main event. Victoria had filled 3 pages of her notebook with technical observations, trajectory calculations, and equipment specifications that would satisfy her reporting requirements back at Marine Corps headquarters. Her handwriting was precise, economical, the kind that came from years of recording data in adverse conditions. Brennan had made his last successful shot 40 minutes ago, a clean hit at 2,200 meters that had earned approving nods from the team. He was now explaining his technique to a cluster of junior operators, his voice animated as he described reading the mirage and compensating for the afternoon thermal shifts. Victoria noticed he left out the part where Voss had quietly corrected his wind call before the shot. Captain Ellis Reardon approached the observation platform where Victoria stood, carrying a ruggedized case that looked like it had been through several combat deployments. He was older than Brennan, probably mid-30s, with the quiet competence of someone who had nothing left to prove. He set the case down carefully and glanced at Victoria with professional courtesy. "Brought something special for the demonstration, ma'am," he said. His accent carried traces of somewhere in the South, maybe Georgia or Alabama, something most people will never see outside of classified briefings. Victoria looked up from her notebook, curious despite herself. The case had the kind of security markings that indicated serious oversight and restricted access. She watched as Reardon worked the combination locks with practiced efficiency, his movements deliberate and controlled. The case opened to reveal ammunition unlike anything the standard SEAL inventory would carry. The rounds were longer than conventional sniper ammunition, with a distinctive copper-colored coating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each one was nested in custom foam, labeled with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to anyone without the proper clearance. "Ghost 7 rounds," Reardon said quietly, his voice carrying a note of reverence. "Experimental long-range ammunition, designed for shots that shouldn't be possible." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a feeling she had trained herself to suppress years ago. She kept her expression neutral, her pen moving across the notebook page in steady strokes. But her mind was suddenly racing through memories she had locked away in compartments marked classified and need to know. "What kind of range are we talking about?" she asked, her voice professionally interested but not overly curious. The voice of someone gathering information for a report, nothing more. Reardon smiled slightly, the expression of someone about to reveal an impressive secret. "Theoretical maximum effective range is 4,200 meters. We've only achieved confirmed hits at 3,800 in testing. The ballistics are classified, but let's just say these rounds do things that conventional physics says shouldn't work." Voss had joined them on the platform, his attention focused on the ammunition with the appreciation of a master craftsman examining superior tools. He picked up one of the rounds carefully, turning it in the light to examine the unusual coating. "We've been testing these for 6 months," he said, addressing Victoria directly for the first time that day. "Lost count of how many attempts we've made at maximum range. Best we've managed is 3 hits out of 27 shots at 3,800 meters. Nobody's touched 4,000. Brennan had noticed the gathering and moved closer, his interest piqued by the specialized ammunition. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the Ghost 7 rounds, the kind of reaction that suggested he had heard rumors but never seen the actual hardware. "Are we actually going to attempt a fourth of SAM-meter shot?" he asked, excitement evident in his voice. "That would be a range record for this facility." Voss nodded slowly, his expression serious. "That's exactly what we're going to attempt. This is why the Colonel is here, to document our progress with the Ghost 7 program for the Inter-Service Working Group." He glanced at Victoria, including her in a moment with professional respect. "The Marine Corps has been asking about our long-range development, and this is the cutting edge." Victoria made another notation in her notebook, her handwriting unchanged, her breathing steady. Inside, something old and familiar was waking up, muscle memory and training that went deeper than conscious thought. She had spent years building walls between her current position and her past, between the administrative colonel and the operator she had been before the promotions and the desk assignments and the classified operations that could never appear on any official record. "How many attempts are planned?" she asked, still writing, still playing her role. Voss checked his watch. "We'll run until we get a hit or until we run out of daylight. Could be 3 shots, could be 20. These rounds are expensive and hard to replace, but this is important data collection." He paused, looking out at the distant target barely visible in the heat shimmer. "Somewhere out there at 4,000 meters, we've got a target that's defeated some of the best snipers in naval special warfare. Today, we find out if the Ghost 7 can finally reach it." The first attempt came 15 minutes later, after Voss had personally selected the rifle and supervised every aspect of the setup. The weapon was a custom build, something that had probably cost more than a luxury car, with an optic system that looked like it belonged on a telescope rather than a firearm. Reardon took the shot, his form textbook perfect, his breathing controlled and measured. The round disappeared downrange with a sharp crack that echoed off the distant rock formations. Everyone waited, eyes fixed on the spotting scopes, waiting for the radio call from the target pit crew stationed at the 4th centimeter mark. The silence stretched for long seconds before the radio crackled to life. "Miss," the voice reported, flat and professional. "No impact observed on target or berm. Estimate at least 50 meters right." Reardon exhaled slowly and stood, shaking his head with frustration. "The wind," he said, looking at the flags positioned at intervals down the range. "I called it 6 miles per hour, but it's got to be gusting higher at mid-range." Brennan was already moving toward the rifle, confident energy radiating from every movement. "Let me take the next one," he said. "I got a feel for these thermals today." Voss nodded and stepped back, giving Brennan room to work. Victoria watched from her position on the observation platform, noting the way Brennan settled into position with practiced ease, the way his hands moved over the rifle with familiar confidence. He was good. She could see that, trained by the best programs the military had to offer. But there was something in his approach that bothered her, a subtle rushing that came from wanting to impress rather than wanting to connect. Brennan took his time, or at least what he considered taking time, reading the wind indicators and making his calculations. He adjusted the scope with small, precise clicks, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the mathematics. 2 minutes later, he was ready. "Send it," Voss said quietly. The second Ghost 7 round tore through the desert air, and again everyone waited. Victoria found herself analyzing the shot almost unconsciously, her mind processing wind indicators and temperature gradients and 100 other variables that most people would never consider. She knew, even before the radio call came, that this one had missed as well. "No impact," the radio reported. "Estimate 30 meters low and 20 left." Brennan stood up, his jaw tight with frustration. "The bullet drop on these rounds is different from anything else," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "The ballistic coefficient is throwing off my calculations." 2 more attempts followed over the next hour. A young SEAL named Petty Officer Hayes took the 3rd shot, managing to get close enough that the spotters reported seeing the impact in the dirt just beyond the target berm. The 4th attempt came from a senior chief with 20 years of sniper experience, and his round apparently sailed over the target entirely, disappearing into the wasteland beyond. Victoria continued taking notes, documenting each attempt with clinical precision. She recorded wind conditions, shooter positions, scope adjustments, and outcomes. Her pen moved steadily across the page, but her mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios and calculations that had nothing to do with her official observer role. The afternoon was bleeding toward evening now, the sun lower on the horizon and painting the desert in shades of amber and deep orange. Voss called for a brief pause, gathering his team to discuss their approach. Victoria could see the frustration building in their body language, the way shoulders tensed and jaws clenched. These were men accustomed to excellence, to achieving objectives that others considered impossible. The target at 4,000 meters was becoming personal. Brennan was arguing for another attempt, his voice carrying across the platform. "I can make this shot, Master Chief. I just need to account for the full Coriolis effect. These rounds are in flight long enough that the Earth's rotation becomes a significant factor." Voss listened, his weathered face thoughtful. "You're right about the Coriolis," he said, "but there's something else we're missing. Something in the way these rounds behave at extreme range that we haven't figured out yet." Victoria looked up from her notebook, her eyes tracking to the distant target that had defeated 4 skilled shooters. The wind had shifted slightly, coming now from a different angle, and the heat shimmer had changed character as the day cooled. She could feel something pulling at her, old instincts demanding attention, muscle memory insisting it had the answers these men were searching for. But she was here as an observer. Just an observer. A Marine Corps colonel with an administrative assignment, documenting SEAL capabilities for an inter-service report that would probably gather dust in some Pentagon filing system. That was her role, her cover, the safe identity she had built to replace the one that lived in classified files and redacted mission reports. Voss was loading another Ghost 7 round into the rifle, preparing for attempt number 5. The security case that held the specialized ammunition was looking noticeably emptier now, each missed shot representing not just failure, but the expenditure of resources that were difficult and expensive to replace. The pressure was building. Victoria could feel it in the air, in the way the SEAL team moved and spoke. They needed a win, needed to prove that the Ghost 7 program could deliver on its theoretical promise. She closed her notebook and slipped it back in her pocket, her eyes never leaving the firing line. The 5th shot missed by what the spotters estimated was 70 meters, sailing wide despite Voss's careful calculations and decades of experience. He stood slowly from the firing position, his expression carefully neutral, but Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders. 6 attempts now, 6 failures, and the sun was getting lower with each passing minute. Staff Sergeant Imani Okafor appeared at Victoria's elbow, carrying a water bottle and wearing the patient expression of someone who had been assigned to support an officer on an observation detail. She had been Victoria's assistant for the past 18 months, efficient and professional, handling the administrative burden that came with a colonel's rank. She handed Victoria the water without being asked, reading the moment with the intuition that made her valuable. "Thank you, Okafor," Victoria said, taking a drink and watching another SEAL approach the firing line. The heat was still oppressive despite the late hour, and her uniform felt heavy with accumulated dust and sweat. "They're really committed to this," Okafor observed quietly, her eyes on the SEAL team. 6 shots with ammunition that probably costs more than my car." Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to say more. She could feel Okafor watching her, the way her assistant sometimes did when she sensed something beneath the surface. Okafor was sharp, had probably noticed things over their months working together that Victoria hoped stayed unnoticed. The 6th attempt came from Reardon again, his second chance at the impossible target. He took even longer this time, checking and rechecking every variable, adjusting his position by fractions of inches. When he finally fired, everyone held their breath, willing this round to find its mark. "Miss," the radio reported. "Closer this time. Estimate 10 meters high, 5 right." A collective sigh rippled through the SEAL team. 10 meters was closer than they had been all day, but close didn't matter at 4,000 meters. Close was still complete failure when you were trying to hit a target the size of a man's torso at nearly 2.5 miles. Brennan was pacing now, his earlier confidence replaced by visible frustration. "This shouldn't be this difficult," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've got the best equipment, the best training, perfect conditions. What are we missing?" Voss was studying the wind indicators again, his eyes tracking the movement of flags and mirage. "The flight time on these rounds is almost 6 seconds, he said thoughtfully. "A lot can happen to a bullet in 6 seconds. A lot of air to travel through, a lot of variables to account for." Victoria felt her fingers twitching, muscle memory trying to express itself through movement. She knew what they were missing, could see it in the way they were setting up their shots, in the calculations they were making. The Ghost 7 rounds didn't behave like conventional ammunition because they weren't designed to. They had characteristics that required different thinking, different intuition, the kind that came from hundreds of hours of testing and failure, and eventually understanding. She had been there when the rounds were first developed, had spent weeks at a range not unlike this one, learning their quirks and peculiarities. She had been the one who first reached 4,000 meters with a Ghost 7, the one who had proven it was possible. That had been 3 years ago, in a different life, when she still operated in the shadows, and her name appeared on mission reports that would never be declassified. The 7th attempt was being prepared. A younger SEAL, whose name Victoria hadn't caught, was settling into position, his movements betraying his nervousness at attempting what his more experienced teammates had failed to achieve. Voss was coaching him through the setup, patient and encouraging despite the mounting failures. Remember, the Master Chief said, "This isn't about ego. This is about data collection. Every miss teaches us something. We're building a knowledge base that will eventually crack this problem." But Victoria could see the doubt creeping in, could feel the weight of repeated failure settling over the team like desert dust. They were SEAL snipers, among the best in the world, and a stationary target was beating them. It was the kind of defeat that challenged identity, that made you question training and ability and worth. The young SEAL fired. The round went long, overshooting the target by an estimated 40 meters. 8 attempts, 8 failures. The Ghost 7 ammunition case was more than half empty now, precious resources expended with nothing to show for it. Brennan kicked at the dirt in frustration. "Maybe the round specifications are wrong," he said. "Maybe these things can't actually do what the ballistics data claims." Voss turned to look at him, his expression hardening. "The rounds work, Lieutenant. They've achieved hits at 3,800 meters in controlled testing. The capability is real. We just haven't figured out how to access it yet." Victoria watched the sun sink lower toward the horizon, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The temperature was dropping now, the desert transitioning from oven to freezer with the dramatic shift that characterized this environment. Wind patterns would change with the cooling air, thermals would behave differently, the whole atmospheric equation was transforming. She pulled out her notebook again, made a notation about temperature and wind direction, documented the 8th failed attempt with the same clinical precision she had maintained all day. But her hand was shaking slightly now, just enough that her writing looked different, less controlled. Okafor noticed. Victoria saw her assistant's eyes flick to the notebook and then away, professional enough not to comment. 2 more attempts, Voss announced to his team. Then we pack it up for the day. We'll review the data tonight and come back tomorrow with fresh perspective. The SEAL team nodded, defeat evident in their postures despite their determination to continue. Victoria closed her notebook and slipped it back in her pocket, her decision made in the quiet space between heartbeats. The 9th attempt belonged to a senior chief named Dalton, a man who had spent 15 years perfecting his craft and had the reputation to match. He approached the rifle with quiet determination, settling into position with the kind of efficiency that came from thousands of repetitions. Victoria watched him work through his pre-shot routine, each movement deliberate and controlled, and she found herself silently willing him to succeed, if only to end this demonstration and release her from the pull of memories. Dalton took his time, more than anyone had so far, reading conditions and making minute adjustments to his position and scope settings. 5 full minutes passed before he was satisfied, before his breathing settled into the rhythm that preceded a shot. The entire range fell silent. Everyone focused on this attempt with an intensity that bordered on desperate. The Ghost 7 round left the barrel with its distinctive crack, and the wait began again. 6 seconds of flight time, 6 seconds of wondering if this would be the one that connected, that proved the technology worked, that justified the investment and training and faith in capability. No impact observed, the radio reported, and Victoria heard several audible groans from the assembled SEALs. Best estimate, 20 meters right, 5 high. Dalton stood and stepped away from the rifle without comment, his face a mask of professional disappointment. 9 attempts, 9 failures, and only 1 shot remaining before Voss called an end to today's testing. The Ghost 7 ammunition case held just 3 rounds now, precious and irreplaceable, at least until the next production batch came through channels that moved at bureaucratic speed. Brennan was already moving toward the firing line, his jaw set with determination. "Let me take the last one," he said to Voss. "I've been studying every attempt, tracking the patterns. I think I see what we've been doing wrong." Voss considered this, his eyes moving from Brennan to the rifle to the distant target that had humiliated his entire team. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Lieutenant. Show us what you've learned." Brennan settled into position with confidence renewed, his body language screaming certainty where others had shown doubt. Victoria could see him working through calculations, lips moving silently as he processed wind and distance and all the variables that went into a shot at this range. He made bold adjustments to the scope, clicks that carried across the quiet platform, changes that suggested he was compensating for something significant. 3 minutes later, he was ready. His breathing settled. His finger found the trigger, and the 10th Ghost 7 round of the day ripped through the cooling desert air. Everyone waited, hope and skepticism mixing in equal measure, the silence heavy with anticipation. "Miss," the radio finally reported, and this time the disappointment in the spotter's voice was unmistakable. "Estimate 60 meters low, 30 left." Not close. Brennan remained in position for a long moment, his shoulders tense, before finally standing and stepping away from the rifle. He said nothing, but his face carried the weight of failure, of confidence proved wrong, of certainty revealed as illusion. Voss looked at the remaining 2 rounds in the case, his expression thoughtful. He glanced at the sun, now touching the horizon and painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The light was fading. Soon it would be too dark to continue even if they wanted to. 10 attempts, 10 failures, and a demonstration that had proven nothing except that 4,000 meters remained beyond their reach. "All right," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of command. "We'll secure the equipment and debrief in the morning. Good efforts today, everyone. We learned valuable lessons, even if we didn't get the outcome we wanted." The SEAL team began the process of breaking down their equipment, movements efficient despite the weight of defeat. Victoria watched them work, watched the way they supported each other despite individual failures, the way they maintained professionalism in the face of disappointment. It was impressive in its own right, the kind of character that defines special operations communities. She should walk away now, should thank Voss for his hospitality, gather her notes, return to her quarters, and write up her observations for the report that would eventually make its way to Marine Corps headquarters. That was the smart play, the safe play, the move that maintained her carefully constructed identity as an administrative colonel with an observer assignment. But Victoria found herself walking toward the firing line instead, her feet carrying her forward before her mind had fully committed to the decision. Okafor noticed immediately, falling in a step behind her with the quiet presence of a good assistant, sensing something significant without understanding what. Voss looked up as Victoria approached, professional courtesy shifting to mild curiosity. "Something you need, Colonel?" Victoria stopped beside the rifle, her eyes tracking down the range toward the target invisible in the distance. The wind had shifted again with the cooling air, flags showing a different pattern than they had an hour ago. The atmosphere was transforming, becoming something new, and she could feel the changes in her bones, in the muscle memory that lived deeper than conscious thought. "Master Chief," she said quietly, her voice steady but carrying something new, something that made Voss's eyes sharpen with sudden attention. "Mind if I try?" The question hung in the desert air, simple words that shifted everything. Around them, SEALs who had been packing equipment paused and turned, surprise evident on faces that had spent the day watching experts fail. Brennan's expression flickered between disbelief and something that might have been offense, the reaction of someone who had just failed and now watched an outsider presume to attempt what he could not achieve. Voss studied Victoria for a long moment, his experienced eyes seeing something that others missed. The way she stood, the way she looked at the rifle, the unconscious assessment of conditions that only someone with serious trigger time would make. He glanced at the remaining 2 Ghost 7 rounds, then back at Victoria, decision calculations playing out behind his weathered face. The silence that followed Victoria's question stretched for several heartbeats, long enough for the wind to shift the flags again and for shadows to lengthen across the firing range. Brennan looked like he wanted to say something, his mouth opening and then closing as he caught Voss's warning glance. The younger SEALs exchanged looks that mixed curiosity with barely concealed skepticism, The kind of reaction that came from watching a desk officer volunteer for something that had defeated their best operators. Voss's expression remained neutral, professional, but Victoria caught the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his gaze moved from her face to her hands and back again. He was reading her the way a professional reads another professional, looking for tells that revealed more than words ever could. "You shoot, Colonel?" he asked, his tone carefully respectful but carrying an undercurrent of genuine interest. "I've spent some time behind a rifle," Victoria replied, her voice calm and understated. "Enough to know what I'm looking at here." Reardon stepped forward, his earlier courtesy now tinged with concern. "Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but these Ghost 7 rounds are specialized equipment. The manual of arms is different from standard ammunition, and the pressures involved can be significant for someone not familiar with the platform." Victoria turned to look at him directly, and something in her gaze made him pause mid-thought. "I appreciate your concern, Captain," she said quietly. "I'll be careful." Voss made his decision with the decisiveness that had probably kept him alive through decades of dangerous work. "All right, Colonel," he said, gesturing toward the rifle. "We've got 2 rounds left. No point in wasting them sitting in the case." He paused, then added with something that might have been the ghost of a smile, "Besides, I'm curious to see what the Marine Corps has been teaching its officers." Victoria moved toward the firing position, her steps measured and deliberate. She could feel every eye on the range tracking her movement, feel the weight of skepticism and curiosity pressing against her like physical force. Okafor had gone very still, her assistant's instincts telling her that something significant was unfolding even if she couldn't quite identify what. The rifle lay on its bipod, still warm from Brennan's attempt, the custom build heavy with optics and modifications that represented cutting-edge technology. Victoria knelt beside it, her movements flowing with a familiarity that came from muscle memory older than her current rank. She didn't touch the weapon immediately, instead spending long seconds studying the setup, the scope adjustments, the way the bipod sat on the platform surface. Brennan had moved closer, unable to resist offering advice despite his earlier failure. "The scope is already zeroed for 4,000 meters, he said, his voice carrying the slightly patronizing tone of someone explaining things to a presumed novice. "Wind call is approximately 8 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 10. You'll need to account for significant bullet drop even with the Go-7 ballistics, and the Coriolis effect at this range is roughly 0.7 mils right." Victoria nodded without looking at him, her attention completely focused on the rifle and the distant target. She reached out and made a single adjustment to the scope, a small turn that made Brennan frown in confusion. Then she shifted the bipod position by perhaps 2 inches, changing the angle by a fraction of a degree that seemed arbitrary to everyone watching. She settled into position behind the rifle with a fluidity that made Voss's eyes narrow further. Her body alignment was perfect, textbook in its efficiency, but there was something else there too, something that went beyond training. The way she melted into the shooting position suggested thousands of hours, suggested the kind of expertise that became instinct, that lived in the body rather than the mind. Her left hand found the stock with automatic precision. Her right hand curled around the grip with a light touch of someone who understood that tension was the enemy of accuracy. She pressed her cheek against the rest, and her eye found the scope, and in that moment she stopped being Colonel Victoria Thorne, Marine Corps liaison officer, and became something else entirely. Through the scope, the world transformed into a narrow tunnel of focus. For 1,000 meters downrange, the target was barely visible even with the advanced optics, a small shape wavering in the heat signature that still radiated from the cooling desert floor. She could see the mirage, could read the way air currents bent light, could interpret a dozen subtle indicators that told her what the atmosphere was doing between her position and that distant target. The Ghost 7 rounds sat in the chamber, waiting. She knew this ammunition intimately, knew its quirks and characteristics the way a musician knows their instrument. The ballistic coefficient that had confused the SEAL shooters was familiar territory for her. The unusual flight characteristics were old friends. The tendency to behave unexpectedly in certain atmospheric conditions was knowledge earned through hard experience. Victoria's breathing settled into the rhythm, the slow control pattern that lowered heart rate and stilled movement. For breaths, then the pause between inhale and exhale, the moment of perfect stillness where the body became a stable platform and the world narrowed to nothing but the reticle and the target and the space between. The wind shifted again, flags showing a change that others might have missed, but that registered instantly in her awareness. She made a microscopic adjustment to her aim, compensation based on instinct and experience rather than calculation. Her finger found the trigger, settled against it with the light pressure that preceded commitment. Around her, the SEAL team had gone silent, watching with the fascination that came from seeing something unexpected unfold. Voss stood motionless, his experienced eye-catching details that others missed, recognition beginning to dawn in his expression even before the shot was fired. The moment stretched, Victoria's finger resting against the trigger with the perfect pressure that lived just before the breaking point. Her breathing had stopped, body locked in the stillness that preceded commitment, every muscle aligned and controlled. Through the scope, the distant target held steady in her vision despite the mirage and distance, a small shape that represented vindication or failure, depending on the next 6 seconds. She pressed through the trigger brake with smooth, steady pressure, no jerking or anticipation, just the clean execution that separated expert shooters from good ones. The Ghost 7 round ignited with a sharp crack that seemed louder in the evening quiet, the rifle's recoil pressing back into her shoulder with familiar force. The muzzle blast kicked up a small cloud of dust that dissipated quickly in the desert air. Victoria stayed in position, keeping her eye to the scope, watching for impact signs, even though at this distance she would see nothing useful. Her body remained perfectly still, maintaining the shooting position as if the rifle might fire again at any moment. Around her, the SEAL team had frozen, every man watching and waiting for the radio call that would determine whether this had been brilliance or embarrassing presumption. The 6 seconds of flight time felt like an eternity. Somewhere downrange, a copper-coated projectile was traveling at velocities that pushed the boundaries of ballistic physics, cutting through air currents and temperature gradients and the invisible forces that affected objects in motion. The Ghost 7 round was doing what it had been designed to do, following trajectories that conventional ammunition could never achieve, but whether it would find its mark remained unknown. The radio crackled to life, and the spotter's voice carried a note of disbelief that broke through his professional composure. "Impact," he said, the single word hanging in the air like a challenge to reality. "Direct hit, center mass on target. Confirm Ghost 7 round impact at 4,000 meters. For a moment, nobody moved. The information seemed to require processing time, seemed too unlikely to accept immediately. Then Reardon grabbed his spotting scope and swung it toward the distant target, his hands moving with urgent precision. Through his optic, he could see what the target pit crew had already confirmed, the fresh impact crater exactly where it needed to be. "Holy shit," someone said quietly, and that broke the spell. The platform erupted in noise, SEALs talking over each other, voices mixing in confusion and amazement. Brennan stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Dalton was shaking his head slowly, a smile beginning to form despite his own earlier failure. Victoria stood slowly from the firing position, her movements calm and controlled, showing none of the excitement radiating from the SEAL team around her. She stepped back from the rifle and brushed dust from her uniform with mechanical efficiency, her face composed and professional. Only Okafor, watching from her position behind the group, saw the slight tremor in her colonel's hands, the small sign that betrayed the adrenaline coursing through her system. Voss approached Victoria with measured steps, his weathered face thoughtful and assessing. "That was exceptional shooting, Colonel," he said, his voice carrying layers of meaning beyond the simple words. "For 1,000 meters on the first attempt with ammunition that defeated 10 highly trained operators." He paused, studying her with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Makes a person wonder where someone picks up that kind of capability. Victoria met his gaze steadily, her expression giving away nothing. I pay attention during demonstrations, Master Chief, she said. Your team provided excellent data on what doesn't work. Process of elimination. Voss's expression suggested he didn't believe that for a second, but he was too professional to push the issue in front of his team. Instead, he turned to address the assembled SEALs, his voice carrying command authority. That, gentlemen, is what success looks like at extreme range. I want everyone to review the scope camera footage from the Colonel's shot. Study her setup, her positioning, her timing. There are lessons here for all of us. Brennan finally found his voice, though it came out strained. Colonel, with respect, that was an incredible shot. He hesitated, clearly wrestling with pride and curiosity. Where did you train? What's your background in precision shooting? Victoria felt the weight of his question, felt the eyes of every SEAL on the platform focused on her, waiting for an answer that would explain what they had just witnessed. The safe response would be something vague, something that deflected attention while maintaining her cover. But standing here, having just fired a Ghost 7 round for the first time in 3 years, having felt that old familiar connection between shooter and target, she found the careful lies harder to access. I've had some specialized training, she said carefully. Different programs, different times. Nothing that appears in any official records you could access. That answer only deepened the curiosity she could see in their faces. Voss's expression had shifted to something like recognition, pieces falling into place in his mind. He was old enough, experienced enough, to know about the programs that didn't officially exist, about the operators who did work that never made it into after-action reports or promotion packets. Reardon was still staring at the distant target through his spotting scope, as if confirming again that the impact was real. 4,087 meters, he said, reading the exact range from his equipment. That's a facility record. That's probably a Ghost 7 program record. He turned to look at Victoria with open respect. Ma'am, whoever trained you knew what they were doing. The sun had fully set now, the desert sky painted in deep purples and the first stars beginning to emerge. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it always did in the high desert when the sun went down. Someone had turned on the platform lights, harsh LED illumination that cast sharp shadows and made everyone look tired and wind-worn. Victoria glanced at her watch, a gesture that suggested she was tracking time for official purposes. I should head back and start on my report, she said, her voice returning to the professional tone of an officer wrapping up an observation assignment. Thank you for the opportunity to document your program, Master Chief. It's been educational. Victoria was halfway to the stairs leading off the observation platform when Voss's voice stopped her. Colonel Thorne, he said, his tone carrying the weight of something more than casual conversation. A moment of your time, please. Privately. She turned to find him standing apart from his team, his weathered face illuminated by the harsh platform lights. There was something in his expression that suggested this wasn't a request she could politely decline. Okafor caught her eye with a questioning look, and Victoria gave a slight nod that sent her assistant back toward the vehicle staging area. The two of them walked to the far edge of the platform, away from the SEALs who were now animatedly discussing the shot and reviewing equipment. The desert stretched out before them in darkness, the distant mountains barely visible against the star-filled sky. The wind had picked up with the temperature drop, carrying the scent of sage and sand. Voss stood silent for a long moment, his eyes on the darkness where the target sat invisible but forever marked by Victoria's impact. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. I've been running sniper programs for naval special warfare for 22 years, he said. Trained hundreds of shooters, seen thousands of shots fired at extreme range. What you just did doesn't happen by accident or by watching others fail. Victoria remained silent, waiting for him to continue, her face composed, but her mind calculating responses and deflections. The smart move was still to maintain her cover, to brush off his observations with something vague and professional. But she could feel the foundation of that cover cracking, could sense that Voss knew more than he was saying. The Ghost 7 program has been operational for 3 years, Voss continued, still not looking at her. Highly classified development, limited distribution, restricted testing protocols. The ballistics data isn't available to general military personnel, and the shooting characteristics are counterintuitive enough that even experienced snipers need extensive familiarization before they can employ the rounds effectively. He turned to face her directly, his eyes sharp despite the darkness. Yet you walked up to an unfamiliar rifle, made one scope adjustment, and put a round on target at a range that defeated 10 of my best operators. That suggests intimate familiarity with Ghost 7 ammunition, the kind that only comes from being directly involved in the development or testing program. Victoria met his gaze steadily, running through her options. She could continue denying, could maintain the fiction of lucky observation and general shooting skills. But Voss was too experienced, had seen too much, and the lie would only damage whatever respect her shot had earned. I was with Marine Special Operations Command, she said finally, her voice quiet but clear. Scout Sniper Platoon, then moved into a program that doesn't have a proper name. We tested new equipment, developed advanced techniques, did work that required capabilities the conventional units didn't possess. Voss nodded slowly, pieces clearly falling into place in his mind. When did you work with Ghost 7? He asked. 3 years ago, Victoria replied. I was part of the initial field testing group. We spent 6 months at a range in Arizona, firing thousands of rounds, learning how they behaved in different conditions. I was the first shooter to achieve a confirmed hit at 4,000 meters with a Ghost 7 round. The admission hung in the desert air between them. Voss absorbed this information without visible surprise, as if it confirmed suspicions he had already formed. So when you showed up here as a liaison officer, you already knew more about this program than anyone on my team. Victoria nodded. I didn't expect to see Ghost 7 rounds today, she said. My assignment was to observe General SEAL sniper capabilities, write a report for the Inter-Service Working Group. When Reardon brought out that ammunition case, I should have recused myself, claimed conflict of interest. But you didn't, Voss observed. You sat through 10 failed attempts by skilled operators before you finally stepped forward. Why? Victoria looked out at the darkness, considering how to explain the pull she had felt, the way old instincts had demanded expression, the difficulty of watching others struggle with something she understood intimately. Because watching them fail felt wrong, she said finally. Because I spent 6 months of my life mastering those rounds, and seeing them misunderstood was harder than I expected. Because maybe part of me needed to know if I could still do it. Voss was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised her. I was part of Joint Task Force 8 years ago, working with Marine Raiders on a direct action mission in Africa. We had a sniper attachment from Marine Special Operations Command, a woman operator who pulled off shots that shouldn't have been possible. Saved the entire assault element when things went wrong. He paused, studying Victoria's face in the dim light. I never got her name, operational security being what it was, but I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone shoot like that. Victoria felt her pulse quicken slightly, but kept her expression neutral. That could have been a lot of different operators, she said. MARSOC has excellent snipers. The woman I'm thinking of had a call sign, Voss continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone testing a theory. Something about ghosts. The junior guys in my team couldn't stop talking about her after the mission. Said she appeared out of nowhere, made impossible shots, then disappeared again like she'd never been there. Victoria remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Some call signs stick, she said carefully. Some disappear when the missions end. Voss smiled slightly, the expression of someone who had gotten the confirmation he was looking for without forcing it. Well, whoever that operator was, she made an impression. And whoever Colonel Victoria Thorne used to be before she became a liaison officer, she just made an impression on my entire SEAL sniper program. He extended his hand, the gesture carrying respect and acknowledgement. Thank you for the demonstration, Colonel. My team learned more in the last 10 minutes than they did in the previous 6 months of testing. Whatever you put in your report, make sure it includes the fact that inter-service cooperation produced tangible results today. Victoria shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the grip of someone who had spent a lifetime behind rifles and in difficult places. "I'll make sure the report reflects the successful demonstration," she said. "And Master Chief, I'd appreciate if the details of my background stayed between us. My current position requires a certain level of operational anonymity." Voss nodded his understanding, but there was something in his expression that suggested the conversation wasn't quite finished. "Your secret is safe with me, Colonel," he said, "but I'm not sure it's going to stay secret much longer. Not after what just happened out there." Victoria followed his gaze back toward the platform where his SEAL team was still gathered around the rifle and scope camera equipment. She could see them replaying the footage, studying her approach and technique with the intensity of professionals trying to decode excellence. Brennan was gesturing animatedly, his earlier frustration transformed into the kind of obsessive analysis that characterized special operations communities. "They're going to have questions," Voss continued. "They're going to want to know how you learned to shoot like that. Were you trained? What programs you were part of? These are SEALs, Colonel. They don't accept mystery easily, especially not when it outperforms them on their own range." Victoria felt the weight of that truth settling over her. The careful separation she had maintained between her past and present was fracturing, the clean division between operator and administrator becoming impossible to sustain. One shot had undone years of careful identity management, had revealed capabilities that were supposed to stay buried in classified files. "What do you suggest?" she asked Voss, genuinely curious about his perspective. The Master Chief considered this, his eyes still on his team. "You could walk away right now, file your report, and never come back. Let them wonder and speculate, but never get answers. That would maintain your operational security." "But," Victoria prompted, hearing the unspoken alternative in his tone. "But," Voss continued, "you could also use this moment to build something valuable. Inter-service cooperation isn't just about reports and liaison assignments. It's about operators learning from operators, about sharing hard-won expertise that makes everyone better. My team just watched you do something they couldn't, and right now they're hungry to understand how." Victoria thought about this, about the walls she had built and the reasons for building them. After the operations in places that didn't officially exist, after the missions that never made it into records, she had accepted the promotion and the desk assignment as a way to step back from the edge. The administrative role had been safe, predictable, free from the weight of decisions made in darkness and consequence measured in lives. But standing here on this firing range, having felt the rifle's recoil and watched that round fly true, she recognized something she had been denying for 3 years. She missed it, missed the clarity of purpose that came from mastering difficult skills, missed the connection with other operators who understood what it meant to push beyond normal human limitations, missed being part of something that demanded excellence and accepted nothing less. "How long are you scheduled to be here?" Voss asked, pulling her back from introspection. "Another 4 days," Victoria replied. "My orders were to observe and document your long-range program, assess capabilities for the inter-service working group." Voss smiled, the expression carrying a hint of strategic thinking. "Then I suggest you spend those 4 days actually observing and documenting. Hence an assessment. My team needs to understand how to employ Ghost 7 rounds effectively, and you're clearly the subject matter expert. Consider it extending your liaison duties." Victoria turned to look at him directly, reading the offer behind his words. "You want me to train your snipers," she said, not quite a question. "I want you to share your expertise," Voss corrected. "My snipers are already trained. They just need someone who understands this specific capability to show them what right looks like. And between us, Colonel, I think you need this as much as they do." The observation struck deeper than Victoria wanted to admit. She thought about her office back at Marine Corps headquarters, about the meetings and paperwork and administrative duties that filled her days with productive emptiness. She thought about the careful distance she maintained from the operator she used to be, the way she had convinced herself that chapter of her life was finished. "For days," she said finally. "I'll work with your team for 4 days, share what I know about Go 7 employment. But Master Chief, I need your word that this stays contained. No official records of my involvement beyond the liaison assignment. No names in after-action reports or training documentation. Voss extended his hand again. You have my word, Colonel. As far as official paperwork goes, you're just a Marine liaison officer who happened to observe our testing. What my team learns in the next 4 days is just the result of good inter-service cooperation and professional development. They shook on it, and Victoria felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she had kept firmly closed for years. She looked back toward the platform where the SEAL team was still gathered, still analyzing the shot that had changed the dynamic of this assignment. I should probably go talk to them, she said. Answer some questions before the speculation gets too wild. Voss nodded. I'll let them know you'll be working with us for the remainder of your visit. Fair warning, though, Brennan is probably going to be difficult. Having a Marine show him up on a Navy range hit his pride pretty hard. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Lieutenant Brennan will survive the experience, she said. Pride is less important than capability. If he's as good as his file suggests, he'll recognize that and move past it. They walked back toward the platform together. Two professionals who had found unexpected common ground in the complexity of military service and the demands of excellence. The SEAL team noticed their approach and conversations died away, replaced by the anticipatory silence of people waiting for answers to questions they hadn't yet asked. Gentlemen, Voss said, his voice carrying command authority. Colonel Thorne has agreed to extend her liaison duties for the remainder of her visit. She'll be working with us directly on Ghost 7 employment techniques and extreme range shooting protocols. I expect everyone to take full advantage of this learning opportunity. Reardon was the first to respond, his earlier concern replaced by genuine enthusiasm. That would be outstanding, ma'am. We've been struggling with these rounds for months. Having someone with your expertise would be invaluable. Brennan remained silent, his jaw tight, but Victoria saw the conflict in his eyes. Pride fighting with professionalism, ego battling against the desire to learn. She had seen that struggle before in other talented operators, had felt it herself on occasions when someone else had demonstrated superior capability. The next 3 days transformed the firing range into something resembling a graduate-level course in extreme precision shooting. Victoria arrived each morning before sunrise, watching the desert emerge from darkness while she prepared training scenarios that would push the SEAL snipers beyond their considerable capabilities. The Ghost 7 ammunition became less mysterious with each session, its peculiar ballistics explained through demonstration rather than theory. Reardon proved to be her most receptive student, approaching each lesson with the humility of someone who recognized how much he didn't know. He was the first to successfully replicate her 4th shot on day 2, his whoop of triumph echoing across the empty range. Victoria watched him celebrate with his teammates and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of passing knowledge to the next generation of operators. Dalton, the senior chief who had missed on attempt 9, spent hours studying wind patterns with Victoria, learning to read atmospheric conditions the way she did. He had the patience and experience to absorb complex information, asking questions that revealed deep understanding. By day 3, he was making calls that matched Victoria's own assessments, his decades of experience finally connecting with the specific demands of Ghost 7 employment. Even the younger SEALs showed remarkable progress, their natural talent combining with focused instruction to produce results that would have seemed impossible 4 days ago. Hayes, the petty officer who had nearly hit the berm on his attempt, achieved a clean hit at 3,800 meters and immediately asked Victoria what he had done wrong that prevented him from reaching the full 4,000. She told him the truth, that nothing was wrong, that he simply needed more time behind the rifle building the muscle memory and atmospheric intuition that separated good extreme-range shots from great ones. Time and repetition, she explained, were the only real teachers at this level. Everything else was just accelerating the process. Brennan remained distant for the first 2 days, watching the instruction with arms crossed and expression carefully neutral. He participated when required, but volunteered nothing, asked no questions, maintained the defensive posture of someone whose pride had been wounded. Victoria let him work through it, understanding that forcing engagement would only deepen his resistance. On the morning of day 3, she found him alone on the range before the rest of the team arrived. He was setting up the rifle with meticulous care, preparing for what looked like a solo practice session. Victoria watched from a distance, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his movements carried frustration alongside determination. "Mind if I observe?" she asked, announcing her presence without startling him. Brennan looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he controlled it. "It's your range too, ma'am," he said, the words technically respectful but carrying an edge. Victoria walked closer, studying his setup with professional interest. "You're pulling the bipod too far back," she observed quietly. "It changes the rifle's natural point of aim by about half a degree. Seems like nothing, but at 4,000 meters that half degree becomes 40 meters of error." Brennan's jaw tightened, but he adjusted the bipod position without argument. "Like this?" he asked, his tone challenging her to find another flaw. "Better," Victoria confirmed. She paused, then decided to address the elephant that had been standing between them for 3 days. "Lieutenant, I'm not here to show you up or diminish what you've accomplished. You're an exceptional sniper with skills that 99% of military shooters will never approach." "Then why does it feel like you made us all look like amateurs?" Brennan said, the words coming out harder than he probably intended. 10 failed attempts by trained SEAL snipers, and you walk up and connect on the first try. You know how that plays in the team room, ma'am. You know what that does to our reputation." Victoria nodded, understanding the source of his frustration better now. "Reputation is earned through thousands of successful operations, not lost through one difficult training evolution," she said. "And for what it's worth, I didn't connect on my first Ghost 7 attempt 3 years ago. I missed my first 17 shots before I started to figure out these rounds." Brennan looked at her skeptically. "17 misses," he said, clearly doubting the claim. 17, Victoria confirmed. "At a range in Arizona that probably looks a lot like this one. I was part of a 3-person test team, and we collectively missed our first 46 attempts before any of us achieved a hit past 3,500 meters. The other 2 operators were both male SEALs, by the way, and they learned these rounds just as slowly as I did." The information seemed to shift something in Brennan's demeanor. "You were actually part of the Ghost 7 development program," he said, more statement than question. Voss wouldn't confirm it, but we all figured that was the only explanation. Victoria considered how much to reveal, then decided that honesty would serve better than evasion. "I was part of a joint program that tested advanced sniper capabilities," she said. "Ghost 7 was one of several projects we worked on. The knowledge I have isn't natural talent, Lieutenant. It's the result of 6 months of intensive work with ammunition that didn't come with an instruction manual." Brennan was quiet for a moment, processing this. "So when you made that shot, you weren't just getting lucky or showing off. You were applying specific knowledge that none of us had access to." "Exactly," Victoria confirmed. "And now you have access to that same knowledge. What you do with it determines whether your team becomes the best Ghost 7 employers in naval special warfare or just another group that knows the rounds exist." Something shifted in Brennan's expression, pride giving way to pragmatic recognition. "Okay," he said finally. "I've been asked for 3 days because my ego got bruised. That was unprofessional and I apologize, ma'am." Victoria smiled slightly. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant. Now show me what you've learned. Take the 4th OSAM-meter shot and walk me through your process. Teach it back to me like I'm a new student." Brennan settled into position behind the rifle, and for the next 30 minutes Victoria watched him work through the setup with newfound understanding. He made small errors, and she corrected them gently, building his confidence rather than tearing it down. When he finally fired, the round connected at 1,300 meters, close enough to prove competence even if not quite reaching the maximum range. "Outstanding," Victoria said, and meant it. "You just made a shot that would have been impossible for you 4 days ago. That's measurable growth, Lieutenant. That's what matters." The rest of the SEAL team began arriving as the sun climbed higher, and Victoria watched Brennan integrate back into the group with renewed energy. He shared what Victoria had taught him during their private session. His earlier resistance transformed into enthusiasm. Voss caught her eye from across the platform and nodded slightly, acknowledgement of the transformation she had facilitated. The final day arrived with clear skies and perfect shooting conditions, the kind of morning that seemed designed for demonstrating mastery. Voss had organized what he called a graduation exercise, giving each SEAL sniper the opportunity to attempt shots at ranges that would have seemed impossible just 4 days earlier. The atmosphere on the firing range carried the energy of confidence rather than desperation, operators moving with the assurance that came from understanding rather than hoping. Reardon opened the demonstration with a clean hit at 4,100 meters, exceeding even Victoria's initial shot and setting a new facility record. The celebration was immediate and genuine, his teammates congratulating him with the kind of respect that elite operators reserve for legitimate achievement. Victoria watched him accept the praise with appropriate humility, noting how much he had grown in just a few days. Dalton followed with a hit at 1,300 meters, his technique flawless and his wind call so accurate that Victoria found nothing to correct. The senior chief had synthesized everything she taught him into a coherent approach that would serve him for the rest of his career. When he stood from the rifle, he walked directly to Victoria and extended his hand. "Thank you, ma'am," he said simply, "for sharing what you know and for treating us like equals instead of students." "You are equals," Victoria replied. "I just had a head start on this particular capability. Give it 6 months, and you'll be teaching others what you learned this week." Hayes achieved his goal of reaching 4,000 meters on his third attempt of the day, his youth and enthusiasm combining with newly acquired knowledge to produce the result he had been chasing. His celebration was less restrained than Reardon's, complete with fist pumps and broad smiles that made even Voss chuckle. The junior operators needed wins like this, needed proof that effort and learning led to tangible results. Brennan took his turn near the end of the session, approaching the rifle with focus that suggested he had spent the night mentally rehearsing every aspect of the shot. Victoria watched him settle into position with the corrected form she had taught him, saw him read the wind with the methodology they had practiced together. His breathing settled into the proper rhythm, and his finger found the trigger with appropriate pressure. The Ghost 7 round flew true, impacting at 4,200 meters and exceeding Victoria's demonstration shot by more than 100 meters. The platform erupted in noise, SEALs surrounding Brennan with congratulations and playful abuse in equal measure. He accepted it all with a grin that transformed his face, pride earned through legitimate achievement rather than borrowed reputation. When the celebration subsided, Brennan sought out Victoria with an expression that mixed gratitude and respect. "I was wrong about you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Wrong about what Marines could teach SEALs, wrong about administrative officers not being real operators, wrong about a lot of things. Thank you for proving it without rubbing my face in it." Victoria smiled, recognizing the growth that admission represented. "You weren't entirely wrong, Lieutenant," she said. "Most administrative officers aren't former operators, and inter-service rivalry exists for reasons. You just had the bad luck to run into an exception. Learn from it and move forward." As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Voss gathered everyone for a final debrief. He stood on the observation platform with the desert spreading behind him, his weathered face carrying satisfaction that went beyond simple training success. "Over the past 4 days," he began, "this team has achieved something remarkable. We went from 0 successful Ghost 7 employments at 4,000 meters to having 6 qualified operators who can consistently achieve hits at extreme range." He paused, looking at each member of his team before continuing. "That transformation happened because we had the benefit of learning from someone with hard-won expertise, someone who chose to share knowledge instead of hoarding it. Colonel Thorne reminded us that excellence isn't about which service you belong to or what uniform you wear. It's about mastering your craft and helping others do the same." The SEAL team responded with applause that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Victoria accepted it with a nod, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. These men needed to acknowledge what they had learned, needed to formalize the transition from skepticism to respect. Voss approached her after the debrief concluded, carrying a small case that looked official and important. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, he said formally, "I want to present you with something." He opened the case to reveal a single Ghost 7 round mounted on a display plaque, engraved with the date and range of her demonstration shot. The inscription read simply, 4,087 meters, first attempt, Colonel Victoria Thorne, USMC. Victoria felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. "Master Chief, I can't accept this," she said quietly. "My involvement here needs to stay unofficial." Voss smiled slightly. "The plaque is from my office, Colonel, but the round itself, that's yours. A reminder that the operator you used to be is still part of who you are, regardless of what job the Corps assigns you." She accepted the case, feeling the weight of what it represented. "Thank you," she said, "for the opportunity and for understanding why I needed to maintain distance." The SEAL team was breaking down equipment now, preparing to secure the range for the night. Victoria watched them work with the efficiency that came from years of practice, these warriors who had welcomed her into their community despite initial skepticism. Okafor appeared at her side, silent and observant as always, reading the moment with characteristic insight. "Ready to head back, ma'am?" her assistant asked. Victoria took one last look at the firing range, at the distant target that would forever carry the marks of this week's achievements, at the setting sun painting the desert in familiar colors. "Almost," she said. "Give me just another minute. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or tell us if you've ever witnessed someone reveal unexpected expertise that changed how you viewed them." She stood on the observation platform as darkness gathered, holding the case with her Ghost 7 round and thinking about the walls between past and present, between operator and administrator, between who she had been and who she had become. This week had proven those walls were more permeable than she had believed, that excellence once achieved never truly disappeared, that the core of an operator remained regardless of rank or assignment. Tomorrow she would return to Marine Corps headquarters, return to meetings and paperwork and the administrative duties that filled her days. But she would carry this experience with her, this reminder that sharing knowledge mattered as much as possessing it, that building bridges between services strengthened everyone, that stepping out of comfortable roles sometimes led to the most meaningful growth. Victoria Thorne walked off the firing range as the stars emerged overhead, no longer quite the same person who had arrived 4 days earlier, carrying proof that some identities could coexist rather than compete, that the operator and the colonel were both authentic versions of the same complicated truth. The first shot of the demonstration came 30 minutes later, after the team had completed their equipment checks and range safety protocols. Brennan took the primary shooting position, his confidence evident in the way he settled behind the rifle. The weapon was a custom build, something that represented thousands of hours of testing and refinement, with an optic system that cost more than most people earned in a year. Victoria watched from her position on the observation platform, pen poised over a notebook, ready to document the capabilities she was supposed to be assessing. The morning heat was already building, the kind that made uniforms stick to skin and turned metal surfaces too hot to touch comfortably. Around her, junior SEALs manned spotting scopes and wind measurement equipment, their movements efficient and professional. Brennan was calling his shot now, his voice carrying across the platform as he worked through calculations. Wind is 5 miles per hour from a northwest. Temperature is 94 degrees. Range is 2,200 meters. Adjusting for a 10-second flight time and accounting for the thermal layer at mid-range. Voss stood nearby, observing with the critical eye of a master evaluating a student. His weathered hands held a range finder and data book, cross-referencing Brennan's calls against known conditions. The relationship between instructor and student was evident in their body language, the way Voss waited for Brennan to work through the problem before offering guidance. "Send it," Voss said finally, approval implicit in the simple command. The rifle cracked and the round disappeared downrange, followed by 6 seconds of waiting while everyone tracked through their optics. Victoria found herself automatically calculating trajectory and wind drift, old habits asserting themselves despite her intention to remain a passive observer. She knew, even before the spotter called it, that the shot would connect. Impact, the radio announced. Clean hit, center mass. The SEAL team responded with professional satisfaction, nods and quiet comments that acknowledged good work without excessive celebration. This was expected performance, the baseline capability that made them naval special warfare operators. Brennan stood from the rifle with a slight smile, accepting congratulations from his teammates with the ease of someone accustomed to success. Victoria made notes in her careful handwriting, documenting the shot parameters and outcome. Her observations were detailed and technical, the kind of reporting that would satisfy headquarters requirements. But part of her mind was elsewhere, comparing what she was seeing to her own experiences, measuring these capabilities against standards that existed in classified programs and redacted mission reports. The demonstration continued through the morning, each shooter taking turns at progressively longer ranges. Reardon connected at 2,400 meters with a shot that drew approving comments from Voss. A younger SEAL named Petty Officer Hayes made a spectacular hit at 1,900 meters in challenging wind conditions, his youth and enthusiasm evident in his reaction. They were good, Victoria had to admit. Better than good, they were exceptional by conventional standards. Their wind calls were accurate, their form was textbook, their equipment handling was professional. These were operators who had earned their positions through talent and dedication, who represented the upper echelon of military marksmanship. But there was something missing in their approach, something Victoria recognized from her own early training before the specialized programs. They were following procedures and applying formulas, executing techniques they had been taught rather than understanding the deeper principles that govern extreme-range shooting. It was the difference between knowing the rules and understanding the game. Staff Sergeant Okafor approached with fresh water and a slight frown. "You look skeptical, ma'am," she observed quietly, her tone suggesting she had noticed something in Victoria's expression that others might have missed. "Just taking notes," Victoria replied, accepting the water gratefully. "They're impressive shooters." "But," Okafor prompted, reading the unspoken qualification in her colonel's tone. Victoria hesitated, then decided honesty served better than deflection with her assistant. "But they're working very hard to achieve results that should come more naturally at this level," she said carefully. "Like watching someone solve a math problem by memorizing formulas instead of understanding the underlying mathematics." Okafor absorbed this with a quiet intelligence that made her valuable. "You think you could do better?" she asked, the question carrying no challenge, just curiosity. Victoria didn't answer immediately, her eyes tracking another SEAL as he prepared for his attempt. The truth was complicated, wrapped in classifications and operational security and the careful distance she maintained between her current role and her past capabilities. "Yes," she finally said quietly, "but that's not why I'm here." The morning stretched toward noon, the heat becoming oppressive and the mirage making distance observation difficult. Voss called for a break, giving his team time to hydrate and prepare for the afternoon session. The SEALs moved to a shaded area near the equipment staging zone, their conversation animated as they discussed techniques and compared notes. Victoria remained on the observation platform, finishing her documentation while the morning's demonstrations were fresh in her mind. She noted weather conditions, equipment specifications, shooter performance metrics, all the data points that would eventually become bullet points in her report. The work was methodical and familiar, the safe harbor of administrative duties that kept her far from the sharp edge of operational deployment. But standing here on this range, watching these operators work, she felt the pull of something she had tried to leave behind. The muscle memory in her hands, the automatic assessment of wind and distance, the deep understanding of what it took to send a round true across impossible distances. 3 years of desk assignments hadn't erased what she had been, had only buried it under layers of meetings and paperwork and carefully maintained distance. Voss climbed the stairs to the observation platform, carrying a ruggedized equipment case that looked important. "Colonel," he said, his tone suggesting the afternoon would be different from the morning. We're about to move into the advanced demonstration. This is the part that will really interest your inter-service working group.